So I'd like to introduce Diane Gross Percy. Diane's an education and training specialist with the Continuing Education Division at Vermont Tech. She provides organizational training and development for businesses, schools, professional groups, and organizations throughout Vermont. Diane has served as an educator for over 30 years and has been recognized for her excellence in teaching. She's a certified trainer for Development Dimensions International Learning Systems. Her education includes a bachelor's and a master's in education from the University of Vermont. Please join me in welcoming Diane for a fun and thought-provoking closing session today.
So I talk with my hands, and they were like, but you got to use a microphone, so I'm going to keep it in this vicinity, and then if you in the back say I can't hear you, I promise you I will use the mic, okay? So good afternoon, everybody, and I just want to get started. They asked, I had several people say, can we have a dance party? And absolutely. Do I have any David Bowie fans in the room? David Bowie, yeah, right? One of the best songs ever. Okay, take a look at the lyrics. If you're gonna get up, that's fine too. Some of the best lyrics about change.
Still don't know what I was waiting for, and my time was running wild in the dead streets, and every time I thought I got it made, it seemed the taste was not so sweet. So I turned myself to face me. I've never caught a glimpse how the others must see the faker. I'm much too fast.
Now you know this chorus.
Changes, face the strange. Changes. Don't wanna be a richer man.
Should I come with the mic?
Changes, face the strange. Changes. It's gonna have to be a different man. Now may change me, but I can't waste time.
Yeah. So I love those lyrics because when you take a look at them, and whenever I go to a cocktail party and that song comes on, there's always an argument. And the argument tends to be about some of the lyrics there that say, hey, no, it's not turn and face the strange, it's turn and face the change. It's like, no, it's the strange. And then one guy was like, no, it's turn and face the strain, right? And then, but every time I think of change, and I help people talk about change and get comfortable with change, I always look at the first couple of opening lines there, right? Every time I think I've got it made, it feels like the taste was not so sweet. That's why I love this song. I love that I have to turn and face me if I'm going to cope with the change, right? It's about me. If I'm going to help somebody else, I got to start with myself. I can't trace time, change time, whatever the lyrics really are, because that was the way I sing it. Yeah. Whatever they really are, I don't. Yeah. Whatever they really are, I just think it speaks volumes about all of us and change. Okay. I want to thank you for saving some of your time to come and hear my remarks and my perspective on change. I am Diane Gross Percy, and I do work for I work for Vermont Technical College.
So and you had to look that up?
Yeah, right. Who should I say I'm here from? The Continuing Education and Workforce Development. And so when I heard you were meeting, I was excited to get asked to come and just share my perspective on change. About coping with it and then helping others cope with change as well. I was asked to be a little inspirational, and I was definitely asked to be funny. And I'm not sure about inspirational, but I know I am pretty funny. And that's what my friends tell me. And I get that from my dad. This is what I was looking for, actually. Okay, so I get that from my dad. And there he is. That's Gene. We call him fondly Gino. And in this picture, he's about 54 years old. And he's the same age I am right now. And he's working in his diner. His diner was called Malls. It's still there if you ever get to Southie down South Boston. Yeah. I was telling my friend here that my youngest brother-in-law would always come to the restaurant because he could eat 3 pancakes and stuff like that from my dad. He'd say, oh yeah, bring Matthew down. And Matthew would yell out, because he was just 7 years old, and he would yell out, hey, guess what, Mr. Gross? If you spell it backwards, you get slum. So that's how you'll always remember it, Malls. Okay? So hard and he's getting everybody to do his job. And the reason why he's so happy in that picture is because that was then. And back then, it was that generation where you could just tell people what to do and direct people to what to do. And you could expect them to do it, am I right? Right. And I remember distinctly growing up as a little girl, if my father got mad at somebody that was working in the restaurant, he just said, "You're out of here." Right? He didn't have to coach and develop them. He could tell people what to do, expect them to do it, and say, kind of forget about it if they, and it wasn't like there was a shortage of help. I remember when he got rid of Jimmy Fallon, he had all the tattoos, love written right here on his fingernails, and misspelled. Right? And when he got rid of Jimmy Fallon, the short order cook, it didn't matter because Jimmy Fallon knew a guy, in the neighborhood that could come down and be the next waiter, waitress, short order cook, whatever my dad needed. And that's the way most of the businesses were run around him were run as well. So the reason I brought that slide, it makes me so happy because that's 1981, and that's the year I started teaching up in Vermont. And I started out in a little tiny town called Morrisville, Vermont. Yeah, okay. And so there I was out in Morrisville, and I was all excited because I was raised by Gino. And so I was ready to go, right? To direct and tell people what to do. Forget about it, right? But and I had the bigger desk because I was going to be a teacher, so I had the kids. So really, direct and tell, and if they gave me any problem, out of my classroom they were going to go. And for a couple of years I enjoyed that. But it changed right in front of me. And we are the generation that has changed since we've been working. It's all changed even since we've been working inside organizational life. And nobody told us, nobody delivered the memo to me and said, guess what, it's going to change and it's all this now, right? It just kind of happened and morphed as I was inside the organization doing my thing. So in order to be productive, when I think about change and the kind of the panic I feel sometimes, I think about this quote, and I know most of you in the room probably have seen or interacted with this quote. So there it is. And that's all very good, right? The famous quote by Darwin. But nobody told me I was going to have to learn to cope with the pace of change, right? So I get it about being responsive. We all know that as professionals, but it's about coping with the pace. Now, some of you are going to relate to this story. I can remember being 9 years old, and I was in the back seat of the white station wagon. Of course, he didn't have a safety belt or anything. I leaned forward, and I was complaining to my parents. I was 1 of 4. You guys, you got everything. You invented everything. And I was naming off, all the good stuff that their generation invented, color TV. How many of you grew up and you had, black and white TV when you first, but thank you, right? And then next thing you know, it was color, right? And you didn't have a TV in every single room in the house either. Microwave ovens. I remember Dad bringing home this big honking, right, and it was big. And he brought it home from the restaurant and he put it on the counter, and my mother was like, get that out of here, we don't need it. And he was like, no, you're gonna cook a pot roast today. TV dinners. That was awesome, and then my sisters and I loved it because when Mom was in a good mood, we could get out the little remember those little floral TV trays? Right? Okay, and have our Fresca, Tab. Oh, Tab was a big celebration in the house because all of us could drink the cola and there wasn't going to be a drip in our house. Jim tastes Tab, it was like gasoline, but he loved it. Yeah, so my parents just laughed when I did that little thing with them in the car because they knew things were going to change. But neither they or anybody else predicted the sort of relentless pace of change that we were all going to cope with, right? And you're feeling it, right? So here's a good example. This is Pete Silas. And Silas was he used to be the CEO of Phillips Petroleum. And he said, you can't wait and wait for things to catch up. You can't wait for the storm to blow over. You have to learn to work in the rain. Yeah? When you think about the acceleration of the pace of change. So I brought for you, to sit back and relax, a movie that's kind of going to take you there to where hopefully, the facts themselves are interesting, but I think the overall message is what I want you to get out of this movie clip. It's about 3.5 minutes long, enough to have the popcorn, because if you feel somebody tapping, they're trying to give you the popcorn, okay? Not really. Okay, here we go. Pace of change. Let's see if you can relate to this. If you want to move up further to see some of the facts, that's great. get most of that, and that's a 2012 clip. What's changed in the last year? Some of those factoids. Which ones?
The billion, like to 500 million people was done, I think, by GTA 5 in less than 24 hours.
Yeah. So I think that's the one word in there. Anybody other reactions to the movie clip and what you're living through, and here you are doing the work that you do, and yet compound this with family life, never mind organizational life. Those of you that work in the community, it's fast, it's furious, it's relentless. It's not what my dad was talking about with his changes. It's not what he predicted for me, right? And I think we have to be sensitive to what people are going through. We are the exponential generation of workers. Exponential, that kind of like hit me, that's the particular word. And you know, I don't care about tweets, but it's 500 million tweets from the New York Times just a couple of months ago. 500 million tweets, not 50 million, in just a year, right? I mean, who cares about tweets? That's not my thing, but it's very interesting to me. You know, it's like dancing with a 1,000-pound gorilla. If those of you that got my hand, did everybody have a hand up? Yeah. That's why I tittle it that. I like to bring him, just with me to remind me. And again, maybe with my dad's generation, maybe one 1,000-pound gorilla. I'm sure my dad struggled with changes, but most of us are dealing with and dancing with 2, 3, 5, maybe 12. How many gorillas are you dancing with right now in your life? More than one, I would guess. Big gorillas. And the thing is, when you're dancing with a gorilla, you don't sit down when you're tired. You sit down if and when he's ever tired. The other problem with change that I would like to have acknowledged, and I'd like you to go back and consider acknowledging this with people that you are asking to change, is most of the people you're asking to change, they don't hold the 4 aces. So if you hold the 4 aces, you don't have to ask for a redeal. What do I mean by that in terms of change? Most of the people that you're asking to change, and you're rolling your eyes because they're not changing fast enough or adopting your way or your methodologies, they don't hold the 4 aces. What does that mean in terms of change?
They don't have to do what you said.
Yeah.
They're not decision makers.
They're not the decision maker. They don't have the power. And put that in the context of living in exponential times, because it feels out of control. And most of you have probably taken those different personality inventories or communication style inventories. Okay? And there's a lot of people that interface with the world because they like control. That's one of the preferences. Okay? In your handouts, I brought, to me, one of the the best tools I've seen when I go around and help people manage and cope with change, and see if you can find this one in the handout.
It's a 4-page handout.
I can keep going, Linda. And then we'll hold it up, okay? Managing complex change. Let's go through it quickly, and then you tell me if you get as jazzed about it as I do. Okay? So when you're managing complex change, and you're just keeping the status quo going, you know that we're all working under some kind of vision. Okay, there's got to be a skill set and incentives. There has to be resources or you wouldn't be able to get the job done. And action plans, right? When you make a case for change, those are the same elements that sit and come into play. And yet, look what happens. If there is no vision articulated, people feel a lot of confusion, right? If there's a vision articulated but not a skill set, that's what's going on for me right now in my particular job, where they announced, oh, by the way, you grew and you doubled, and that's so great, but now everybody, this is my life, just in the college life, everybody in here now, you're in charge of your own marketing, of your own classes, and good luck with that, and yay, right? That's the vision, okay? There's no skill set, and so what do we all feel? A lot of anxiety, right? If that's the piece that's missing. Incentives, you'll get your change, it'll be pretty gradual. Lack of resources, a lot of frustration, and a lack of an action plan. You'll get there, a lot of false starts. How many like the handout? Yeah, doesn't it make sense on a nice, clear, okay? I encourage you, just take it out of the handouts and copy it back and share it with people. Because now all of a sudden, the conversation isn't personal, the conversation becomes around what's missing kind of thing. What I'd like you to do is grab a pen or pencil there, and somewhere in the corner, Linda would like it up here in the left-hand corner, just jot down maybe an idea or two about what you're coping with. Like I'm coping with at the college, this whole thing, everybody's gonna do their own marketing. At home, if you like to use problems from home, I'm putting on a small little mudroom. It should be a nice, easy project. This is the 4th edition. Okay, it's been a year. We're nowhere near, it's right? And then you gotta, it's in your face all day long, right? So I've got that particular change. So sometimes they're happy changes. But just note it, because then I'm gonna have you have a quick conversation about what's going on. So just quickly note a change that you're coping with back at work. If it's easy for you to do home, then do home. But get some kind of context going. Right? Something that you're going through, grappling with. And it does have to, I can't wait till I have my mud room, right? That's not an unpleasant thing, but it's not going well. And it's the same problem up there. Just at your table, have a brief conversation, because I want you to be able to use the chart with the context of what it is you're grappling with. So it'll get a little loud, which is absolutely fine, because that means you're working and learning. What about the chart hits and interacts with your problem that you're coping with? Go ahead at your tables, please.
Discuss amongst yourselves.
Discuss amongst yourselves, right. Is that extra hard because I'm moving around?
No.
Okay. That's my style.
It's keeping me out of my email. That's a good thing.
What's that?
It's keeping me out of my
Oh,
email.
good.
That's a good
I
thing.
should have told you.
It's fine.
Okay, so you have a lot to talk about with change. I find that always interesting when I'm out work. Isn't it interesting? And I can't, other things that I do, I love to work with people about how to have effective meetings where, what if people would take time in meetings, just 5-10 minutes, to get the provocative question up, just an open-ended question, and let people have paid company time to think and talk at work about the change. What's holding them back? What's exciting? What's unnerving? Whatever the question is that you want to throw them. And people always say, oh, this is a good idea. Like, okay, well, let's just do that, right? And start running meetings that are really gathering people in. Because here you are. I'm so impressed by the credentials in the room, and yet look at the amount of talking that needs to go on about it's kind of the hurdles and the obstacles you're interacting with. So what happened? Give me some feedback about the slide and about your problems and what you're thinking about. What kind of reactions do you have to the slide? And then it goes so quiet, okay? Reactions to the slide and your own thing. Wait, yeah, go ahead.
Somebody in our group commented that it actually takes a lot of people to make the change. Different people in the organization are at different places.
Yeah, and you got to take people where they're at. Once I know where they're at, I can begin the process. But sometimes we expect the Tarzan swing, the announcement about the change, commitment, right? The big Tarzan swing, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes here. Thank you. Other reactions? Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in the entrepreneurial space.
Yeah.
And with entrepreneurs, there's no end of vision, and you know what the incentives are, but you don't necessarily have the skills, the resources, or the action plan. So what do you get? Anxiety, frustration, and false starts.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other reaction?
Yeah, and I think within a team, you also have different people that deal with it differently. So some people have not the skills, or might have the skills but are anxious people. And so it's always interesting to change that if you have something where you can implement more, some things can get out of hand a lot more rapidly depending on the change and who it's affecting within the team.
I wanted to just bring you some common sense things to take back with you. Full permission, just copy it, get it out to people, start talking about the reactions to the change versus just you against me kind of thing, or whether we do that publicly or behind your back kind of thing, right? Okay, let's give some context to this though. I've got just a couple of things I want to mention here about making change happen. Whether you like big scary books, people love to, some people in the room like that kind of thing. And if you're more like me and you like big scary books in the form of a fable, how many have read it? Oh, sorry, Our Iceberg is Melting? Yeah, right, great. Isn't that a great fable? Okay, and this is Cotter stuff out of Harvard Business. And it's the same story, just whether you like it in a book format or versus in a fable format. But it will just give you a synopsis of enough common sense concepts to get out there and be more effective, if you will, with the changes that you're asking of other people. So I just summarized them here for you, and I thought they were important enough. I put them on your handout. So he says, let's look at this in terms of 4 pieces. Set the stage. It says when you're doing a sense of change, something with change, increase that sense of urgency. Okay? Help others see the need for change and the importance of acting immediately. I want things in healthcare to move along more quickly, right? I work with people that make cake cups. I say to them, relax, it's coffee, okay? There is a sense of, right? But when we're dealing with, people who cut people open for a living, there's a little bit more sense of urgency for all of us. We all want to discover the cures that hold back and take our loved ones from us. So there is a sense of urgency. Building that guiding team. I have a group in Vermont, they call themselves the Guiding Coalition. Great. It's a team with some good knowledge skills, credibility. This is the team with some leadership skills, some analytical ability, some authority, if you will. John Cotter says, okay, you've set the stage. You want to make change happen, decide what to do. Isn't Isn't that common sense? Decide what to do. And he's saying, develop a clear vision. Get it right. Start sharing it with people. There's that missing vision piece from my previous slide, right? He says, then get out there and make it happen. How many so far can relate to the common sense that Carter's bringing you? Okay, that's why the book is just so great. You don't need fancy theory. You need things that will resonate with people. The reason I put an asterisk next to communicate for buy-in, that's where I'm going to be finishing today. We have to go talk about and slice and dice. What does that mean to communicate for buy-in? So hold up. Enable action. He's saying empower others to act. Right? Find out, remove the barriers so that they can take the action they need to take. Number 6, create short-term wins. Be visible about those wins, the small successes. Right? That's going to be more compelling. I was at a big meeting last night. For those of you, anybody here besides the middle table that lives in Vermont with me? Anybody else? Yeah, great. So here's an interesting thing that's happening in Vermont. And once it happens in one of the states in New England, you can rest assured it's coming. So they're beating the drum to change the school calendar. And what that would mean would take the 9 weeks of summer vacation and shorten it down to, say, 5 or 6. Okay. And then what we're going to do is take those 5 or 6 weeks. So this isn't about more education, it's about changing the calendar. So it's still only going to be at 175 days. And we're going to sprinkle those extra days now, 3 to 4 weeks, throughout the so 2 weeks off at February break, and 2 weeks off at April break. Okay, and a week off in October. So you can imagine the forum. They had 4 forums on it. I was at one last night, standing room only, 400 in Essex, St. Albans, the northern part of the state, so on and so forth. Because people came out in droves. And we had six, they call themselves the superintendents that created the proposal. Right? Look at all the pieces of change that were missing there. And they were surprised when people began to not so politely tell them, the big mistakes they made, including obviously the business community. I mean, it was just really wild. And I got to tell you, even as listeners, it was really fascinating to see them go, we're taking your input, we're listening to you, and you're like, no, you don't get it. And they're like, huh? And you're like, oh, it made it. It's really, really, really interesting to go. Don't let up. And Carter's talking about here being relentless. There's that word again, being relentless about initiating a change. I just helped a hospital in Vermont, a big initiative on customer service and doing things right for patients and their families and so on and so forth. A lot of money was pumped into the project. I was just one piece of it. And as soon as that administrator or leader leaves that position, right, you get the feeling that somebody took their foot off the accelerator. I can already predict where that project's going to go, right? Yeah.
What happens if you get to 7 and realize 3's wrong?
You know what? Don't be like the superintendent. Admit it and go back. I guess that's just such a great question. I think in my dad's generation, when you had one gorilla that you were going to push through the doorway, you know what? No matter come hell or high water, he would say it's going to get done. But when you're dancing with 13, 14 different gorillas in all kinds of parts of your life, I think the better strategy is admit you messed up, go back and fix it. They hadn't talked to any teachers on that change proposal. How crazy is that? Right. And these are nice people, well-intentioned people. These aren't idiots. We let them run the schools for all these years. Somebody made that point last night. It isn't like they're brand new. They have been doing the job they messed up. They had a good idea. There was probably some state money involved. Let's do regional council. No, you know the way the political thing goes, right? But admit it. That's the new strategy. When you came out of this, who cared? Forget about it. My dad's way was the right way. You didn't question, right? That's not where we're at. We're here. So you're working with people and a lot of changes and a lot of heavy gorillas of change. So the idea is switch your strategy. Admit what you don't know. Get the right people at the table. Right? And go on, be like an archaeologist, go for an excavation of what it is you don't know and who's the right people. I can remember a project in Pinellas County, Florida, and it was all about the assessment program. They were bringing in schools that were going to be taken over by the state because they had just bombed so much. And you know where it began to shift? Is when leadership said, you know what it is? One piece of these terrible scores was lack of nutrition, so we're bringing in the cafeteria ladies. And the maintenance guys to say, stop mowing the lawns during test days. Now that's no additional money, that's just smart, simple story, but smart thinking about what we're talking about in terms of working better together and more smartly with the resources that you have. Right? I'm sure you've all got even better examples than I have from the education field. Does that make sense? Just working smarter. Okay, and then what the most probably important one is the whole piece about making it stick. Because at this point you're talking about culture, the culture shift and the culture change. So I want to go back now to that sticky piece, number 4, about communication for buy-in. And what I really definitely wanted to do was leave you with a methodology, if you will, a vision of change that, again, so simple and clear you can begin tomorrow sharing it with others and helping people get unstuck. So I put this in your handout. People need to understand the change cycle. There's a lot of them out there, and some of them are so complex. You're like yawning, and you're like, what am I supposed to do? I like this one because it's simple and clear. It's written like a roadmap. So you can articulate this back at work starting tomorrow. Couple of pieces. Oh, wait, that's right, long weekend. How about Tuesday? Okay. Right. For the lucky few that get that. I like this because it's telling you what? What are they telling you on this graphic organizer here? This indicates what? It continues. More changes coming, right?
You're going to go down before you go up.
You got to go down, right, before you go up. And then these pieces here, line 1, line 2, and line 3 are indicating to you what?
Bridges.
Right, bridges, barriers, things that we need to anticipate. It's not a smooth trip, okay? So 4 phases. Phase 1, for those of you that are trying to help and promote and endorse change, being aware that many times it doesn't start with those resistant behaviors. Many times it starts because people are in denial. Sometimes rumors start, rumblings start, somebody went to a meeting who knows somebody else, and all of a sudden in organizational life, people get a handle on something's going to change. And I want you to be thinking about some of the behaviors that you're seeing. Are you seeing indifference? Are you seeing people on the surface that are going, oh, I'm fine with this, no problem, and you're like, what, this is a huge change coming, okay? They're not upset, or they appear not to be upset, because they're not really examining what's going on for them internally, okay? If you ask them, they say things like, I'm fine, I'm ready for this, but they fail to be curious. That's a great sign that you're dealing with somebody that's kind of in denial here. They're acting as if nothing's happening. They're only doing routine work, and they're asking you picky little questions that you're like, wait a minute, we're talking about a project like this, and you're asking me about this. That's a sign that you're dealing with somebody, because your response needs to be different. If you're dealing with somebody that's in denial, your response is tons of information. That's the way to get somebody to move through this phase of change, is you do a lot of talking at this stage. You're giving up the information that the person either doesn't have, or didn't access, didn't get, didn't want, right? Lots and lots of information. Clarifying the expectations. Don't fall, and I would love to follow her into denial, because it's a nicer place to be. Don't follow her or him into denial. Phase 2 is the one that we all like to grumble about. That's when people begin to resist. This is the place now where I'm going to have you switch the poster for. Okay, I'll switch it over here. I brought this last poster to indicate, many times, probably because I came up out of Boston with my dad, and I had a little bit of a tough shell growing up in Massachusetts 30-something years ago. And yet it was when I saw this particular poster that I really began to resonate with me that this is really hard for people. You know, we're all excited about the change that you either purchased or you're part of or you invented. You know, you're excited about it. It gets you up in the morning. And this is the 13th gorilla that you just put in front of somebody else. And maybe you get paid decent money. You know, a lot of these folks, they're not maybe where you're at or I'm at. Okay, and here comes the next one. And yet their quality commitment needs to be really high to this when you think about some of the changes that we're endorsing. So when I saw this poster, that the resistance doesn't come from me against you, but it comes from a deep sense of deep disruption, then all of a sudden it made sense to me. The amount of pushback that I was getting. deep disruption, a loss of, people feeling lost, any of these, or a combination of loss of credibility, status. I bring in the big change, it's a loss of power, a loss of expertise, we're going to do it this way, not your way, a loss of seniority, security, influence. I've just dismantled the team or added a new team, and all of a sudden, where's that team? I think if we could be sensitive to those words that I put here for you, sometimes it can gather us a little steam for being more tolerant for anybody that has to hang around in this phase. The response to this phase is different than phase one. The response to this phase, what do you think the response is here? Empathy, absolutely. And what's the other one?
Anger.
This is what they're feeling, right? And so our response is now being quiet and doing all the listening. And listening through their eyes, through their words. Last night, I did wait until 9 o'clock when the presentation was over, and I did go see the 6 superintendents and said, can I give you just a quick process suggestion? This was supposed to be a listening to this community. Would you please put your clipboards down? And again, nice people. They wanted to capture everything. Well, get a scribe to capture everything. Put your clipboards down and listen. Body language-wise, eye-wise, energy-wise, platform-wise, listen to the resistance, listen to the concerns, listen to the feedback. And that's where you're going to manage people through this particular phase of resistance, is when you truly listen. And I don't mean listening, getting ready to prepare what I want to say, my rebuttal, but really listening on the human being level. This is a time to go slow, so you can go fast later on. Reactions to this. I want you to be sensitive too that usually if you're engaged with the initiative of change, you're much farther along on that roadmap. Am I right? You're further along than maybe somebody else that's reacting to your initiative or your call or your process or your procedure. And is trying to understand, wait, why is she talking like this? Because you're already in this excitement phase or the engaged phase. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say something in terms of the question earlier about what happens if the vision is wrong or something like that. I think right here you have to keep your openness, some flexibility, because listening doesn't just mean you're listening, it means you actually are hearing what's being said, and it might require incorporation of new ideas, addressing other things, so the vision might need to morph a little bit at that point and change.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
What do you mean by see a person say goodbye?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. You know, we're looking for rituals. I can remember working with some nurses in northern Vermont about electronic medical records, and of course, who here was around a couple of months ago, just a while ago, when Dartmouth power went down, and so all the records went down, and all over the news was, see, we better not go to electronic medical records because what if it all goes down, right? And I happen to love electronic records because I don't remember the procedures that have been done to me. When I cut my ankle open because I had one of those Yankee candles, I was dusting, and the big Yankee candle, you know what I'm talking about, they're huge, right? And it fell on the table and cracked open and just sliced open my ankle. It was fine, okay, a lot of blood, but it was absolutely fine. Go up to the hospital, and they're like, do you have any tetanus? I'm like, I don't know. When was the last time you had a tetanus shot? I don't know. But now I love electronic because he could tell me. Oh, you're okay. You had one 4 years ago. You're going to be fine. Stitch, stitch, out the door you go. I love it. I think it's terrific. But it was really interesting to listen to some people who are very passionate about their work. And we really had to, at that point, this was about 10 years ago, establish a ritual for them to go through to kind of get them on board with this particular change. I can remember, how many of you remember Carol Bookdahl? Anybody? Carol Bookdahl, right? And Carol saying, we're getting a big barrel, and we're getting some gasoline, and we're going to bring out some records, and we're going to burn them, and we're going to get a passage going, a ritual going, so that people can kind of cross that bridge, right? Some sort of ritual. Why do we have rituals in our American lives? Name some of the rituals you have in life to honor change. What are some of the rituals that we do?
Funerals.
Oh, absolutely.
Graduation.
Graduation, right? What else? What is it?
Weddings.
Weddings.
Birthdays.
I was going to say, where's the birthdays, right? Okay. Anniversaries, taking time to pause. And for those of us that belittle that, I think there's something to be said when now that we're working in this generation, of time with all the different gorillas that perhaps that pausing has things to teach us. I was working with a hospital, and they had gotten rid of a guy on a team because he had been inappropriate. Now, I wasn't there to judge. I didn't know the situation, but I was brought in because now the team was struggling. And they're mad at HR, and HR is mad at the supervisor, and the supervisor, you know, the whole thing, right? So I get brought in, and I'm like, okay, we're going to talk about communication. But it was really important for me. They didn't want to learn anything about communication. They were mad, and they hadn't had a chance to vent, because we don't do that at work. And it was like, we're just going to, kind of like my mother's old advice, put a smile on your face and come to the dinner table. Good old mom, right? That's the way a lot of us grew up, and that's what sits in our work setting. So what we did was, I had to find a ritual. In answer to your question, what's a ritual? Sometimes you just make it up. I had to find an activity for them to do. Brief. I'm not Oprah. It wasn't like you can do a half an hour and a day on it. But I said, oh my gosh, I need a ritual to say goodbye to this guy that they really wanted to get rid of. They all had their own stories. I didn't want to pull out all the stories. I'm not a therapist. This is work. But I did have them take a large index card and write it all out. Use the F-bomb. Use whatever it is. Go ahead and write it right out. Because I wasn't going to read it. And then I under the table, and there she was, my big shredder. And one by one, go ahead and shred that sound. Loved it. I was like, good, we're done. The rest, figure it out at home. This is work. I'm not easy. I'm into accountability. It is work. But they were so stuck. That's an example, a Diane example, of trying to find a ritual to help that group change, move on, grow, accept the new way, and let's go, because it's work. Okay? Third phase, and you know this from the changes you've already coped with in your own life. There is that phase, and you know it because your energy comes back. There's enthusiasm, there's less indecisiveness. I like that there's still chaos because that reminds you about those roadblocks. And when you dance with a gorilla, it's like this, right? Right? It isn't like, it's not a waltz. It's pretty choppy when you're dancing with a big gorilla of change. So it is still full of chaos, but people are ready to begin to work with it. They're finding what's in it for me. This is a time to bring people together, teams together, to let people start to brainstorm what's working, what's not, to tell more of those stories, to identify the missing alternatives and resources. Okay? I would call this phase a phase of focus. So help them identify the resources, bring people together. This isn't a time to keep them separate and, what's your problem? We're moving past that and finding out new ways that people are going to work together. With my own problem about having to market my own material, I don't even know the first thing about making a flyer or marketing. I don't have an electronic base of things to send to people, anything like that. It was so interesting to be at my own team meeting yesterday because we're done with the grumbling. And it's like, all right. I guess we have to do it. And to start to find out who loves e-note. Those e-notes? Who loves to do that? Well, Tia loves to do it. All right, Tia, will you do mine? But what I'll do is I'll take all your, right? And you start negotiating and figuring out how to work smarter together. Okay? And then lastly, that lovely phase of commitment. It's almost like Deming's work where you don't even know that what you're doing, that you've actually made it through and change it. It's coming second nature now. Back here, it's still like on the top of your mind that you've changed. But when you hit here, it's become second nature. That's why I like that empty little arrow to remind you, but get ready. Because the next change has already started bubbling up. It's already somewhere in that organizational life. There's probably rumors out there, probably some people have already slipped into denial, so on and so forth. This is where that teamwork and cooperation, that much higher tolerance,
Then before you jump into box 4, the line that's between box 3 and box 4.
Right.
We talked about that.
Yeah, so my feeling about the box, or the line, if you will, is that, and that's why I sketched it that way, is to remind you it is not smooth. And there is that feeling, because there's a line between each of the 4 boxes. Mm-hmm. To remind you that, like the dance with the gorilla, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And in my dad's generation, who cares? You're fired. Forget about it. Get out of here, right? But in this generation, look, coaching, facilitating, developing, supporting. understanding that we're going to have some success, then something's going to fail. Then what you promised in that vision didn't work, or somebody quit, all the stuff that happens in organizational life. Let's be real about it, that we have to revisit and understand that people are still struggling.
I was thinking that that particular transition would be really important to be tactical and establish processes. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, and I would also agree that this phase 3, is longer, right here, is a lot longer than people want it to be. Because now finally the rumblings are starting down, people are back kind of going, okay, kind of moving towards acceptance, and you want it to go faster. But I really think that this is the piece of where people are learning new behaviors. And if you learn new behaviors, right, look how long it takes any of us.
One other
Yeah.
point on this one.
Yeah.
I think you also need to educate people.
Oh, good.
Because, I mean, I'll never forget
Yeah.
helping in organizations like an EMR.
Yeah.
And when I first got there, the nurse looked at me like,
Right.
we're putting this in?
Yeah.
That's going to help me?
Yeah.
And it was only after a process of talking to her about what all her problems were,
Yeah.
and I said, by the way, if it did that, oh really? And if it did that,
Yeah.
and really? And literally, this was an hour.
Yeah.
This was all it was an hour from the beginning of this change process to the end.
Yeah.
And by the end of the hour, it's like, oh my God, when can you put it in?
Exactly. Right?
But if she wasn't educated about this,
Yeah.
it wasn't really brainstorming.
Yeah. Right.
It was understanding her problems and her needs, and
Yeah.
then moving into how the new technology can help,
Good.
which I don't see on your list.
Okay. I implied, and and you know what? I want to hear some other context. You guys are smart. You know some other things that you're like, well, wait a second, what about this? What about this? Absolutely, there's an educational piece here. Never mind, just because the next change that's coming, gosh, if it could be a slightly less confrontational and painful as this one was. So always invest in education. Absolutely right. Go ahead.
Two complaints I always hear about healthcare. One is that clinicians don't get to weigh in when a lot of the technology gets
That's
created,
right.
and they're mad about that.
Yeah.
But the bigger one that I think is going to come to bite us all
Yeah.
is that the patients have gotten much more vocal, want to be part of the decision-making process and so on. And yet there's meetings that are about patient engagement that no patient
And no
or
patient-
any entity that
There you
has
go.
anything to do with it isn't even invited.
Right, let's change the calendar. You got one family,
Yes,
ready to
exactly.
go, like, right? And it's well.
I got my clipboard.
Right. Okay? And you know, to their credit, that's the way they were educated to be a leader. Come on, when I did my own managerial training, you were told, be smart, do your book learning and get out there and, make the world a better place, Diane, right? And I wasn't taught engagement skills. I wasn't taught change management skills. I certainly wasn't taught how to be less impatient. No, I'm on board. How come she's not on, right? I didn't learn those skills at my dinner table, right? Go ahead.
With incentives,
Yes.
it seems like in phase 1 is a place where management might put forward financial incentives. But it sounds like phase 3 is where people start figuring out what's really in it for me.
What's in it for me, right? And that's where the sustainability is, right? In most hospitals at this point, they don't have anything to dangle at piece 1 any longer. Those days are over, right? So I think if you want to find motivation, incentives, and personal commitment, well, let me ask you this, because I kind of feel like I know the answer, but let me ask you this. Where do you think it rests? If I need to change you, okay, real resistant now, what do I need to do to get you to change? The answer is going to be, because it's life, work life, you are going to change. But what's going to make the road easier? Another, action plan, another committee meeting, another announcement? No. What is it going to take?
No benefit education.
Education, the benefits, that personal content, right? The listening.
What's in it for me?
What's in it for me? And let's get real about that, right? Where's the what's in it for me when the announcement comes like this or by email or whatever? And that's what I mean about running these effective meetings. And listen, I run my share of boring meetings as well, but if you're one of the ones in the room that's running a boring meeting, or you're at least still attending a boring meeting, I think it's time, in order to get that's just my provocative statement today, it's time for us to stand up and go, we can be better than this. Never mind the fancy schmancy stuff that you're doing, but when we're doing people-to-people engagement, let's stop doing the meeting to people and let's start figuring out, and my only solution is stop the meeting occasionally, because I know you have a business meeting to run. insert a couple of really good open-ended questions. You run a meeting for 45 minutes, minimally, to keep me engaged as a 54-year-old woman, you better ask me 2 open-ended questions and I get some airtime with a partner to talk about that. Right? Isn't that the way it is? Right? Otherwise, it's just, it's done, and you know where the real resistance is going to happen? When I go with her to my truck, when I go out with her for my cigarette, when I'm in with her in the ladies' room, and I start to, like the nurse you were just talking about. And that's where the resistance lies. There's the other gorilla. Other reactions, because you're filling in some really good context that any slide is going to miss. Other things you're thinking about. Yeah, okay.
I think one of the challenges is when you're, maybe not stuck isn't the right word, but when phase 2 lasts for a really long time. Because, you know, we're all in the field of implementing information systems in healthcare, and they are really, really hard. In some cases, it's really hard to get it good enough so that people can start seeing a benefit to it. And it's just hard to sustain.
It is hard to sustain. Let people tell the stories of success. Shumlin from Vermont was on the radio yesterday because of the whole healthcare initiative, and he just said, let me tell you a quick story. And he said, 5 years ago with my brother, I just loved it because it resonated with me. I don't know the guy, but I was like, okay, he's making a good point here. He said, 5 years ago with my brother, we were trying to do this, that, and the other thing with our own personal business, and it was miserable. It had some technology to it. And I'm so mad we bought this, and he was talking like this on the radio. So here I am, a Vermont, it really resonated with me. And he said, and yet, we kept going and going because we were kind of almost too far out to go backwards. And he goes, and then we just high-fived us. It was the best thing we had ever did. And we were like, why did we ever resist this, right? People, you know, we're funny human beings. So I think letting people tell their stories of success, sometimes you have to take it away from the initiative and let people talk about other change and efforts that they've been involved with. And you know what? Sometimes it's okay to say it's work. I'm sorry. It is work, and we are going to do this. Let's spend another 15 minutes talking about how hard it is, and then we'll create the ritual. Go ahead.
But I also think, to your point, you need to figure out how you're going to measure this. And you need to identify what's good enough. You don't want it to doesn't have to be perfect. Because I don't know how many times organizations I've been involved with either had analysis paralysis or we got to keep on tweaking it and make it better.
Okay? I will tell you this, talk about education, if you can go back to Monday and start Tuesday and start sharing with people that Deming piece about process improvement. You know, as a 54-year-old woman, if you include me in the change by just saying, look, we already know we're about 30% full of bugs here. Or we're even 55%, wherever you're at. But let me engage with that. So Diane, work with this for 2 weeks and let me know how you can make it better. Diane, right, if you can plug people in to watching the change, observing the change, taking the data on the change, they know where to report, right, process improvement, and educate people about process improvement, I find adults really respond to that versus the feeling of it has to be perfect. And then, because then all they do is spend all their time showing you why it's not perfect. But take somebody like me, I'm an educated person, I'm excited to be at work, I'm feeling the fatigue of my 10th or 12th gorilla. The way to keep me motivated is let me be part of the change, right? You're the expert, but I'm an expert in other areas. Engage me. If this is about engaging people, get right.
That also step 2. So we go, so I run a small medical software company, and it's nice because we get to actually engage the physicians and the patients in our development. The one thing is we do get stuck in stage 2 very often. And one of the things that we've started actually doing is pushing forward and just actually implementing without really talking to anyone. And then 2 months later, we actually follow up and then sit with everyone at the table. And it's a weird sort of process, but we found that it works because people are forced into it. They figure out what the bugs are, and then you can sit down and say, okay, so what are actually the issues that you're facing? Let's sort them out. Because a lot of the problems that ends up happening with phase 2 is there's these ideas of what the problem is going to be, and they're made even worse. But the actual implementation is very different than it actually is. So you can change the entire, so what ends up usually happening is we go in and then it's like, oh, it has to be completely different. And then you should do something completely different, and like, that's what we started, and it didn't work. So we've now been implementing, and then we go back and work it that sort of way. So it's having someone in the organization who can push it through, and then you get buy-in later on. it's not usually the most, like, it's worked for us, but but it also, sometimes you do, I guess, annoy the wrong people at the beginning, because everyone wants to be at the table, but you gotta choose if you want to do this sort of thing, when to do it, because you can really quickly slow everything down.
Use your people skills. Be smart about people. If I get a read from you that I've annoyed you, let's not ignore it. Go, you know what, I think I've annoyed you. Let's see if we, right? That just pulls me right into, we're gonna work on this together. Don't skip the people part. How many people are golfing this weekend? Anybody? Camping? What are you doing this weekend? Sleeping. Okay, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I could talk to you all afternoon. I have one last movie clip for you. This is, to me, something, I don't think you've seen this before. This is Dan Keith. And I think this is a great way to end my talk with you about being sensitive to others and what it's like to go through these massive amounts of changes. I will finish up right after the movie clip to say goodbye to you, but I think you're going to enjoy this. If you want to move up to take a look, that'd be fine. Dan Keith, another great book. Why Change is So Hard. Catch what he says at the end.
You hear something a lot about change, and that is that people don't change because they're too lazy. I'm going to go to bat for the lazy people first.
Yeah.
I think that what looks like laziness is often exhaustion. Let me tell you about a fascinating study in psychology. So picture the scene. Some students come into a lab, and it smells amazing. Somebody's just baked fresh chocolate chip cookies. And in front of them is a table, and on the table are two bowls. One of the bowls has the fresh baked chocolate chip cookies. The other bowl has a bunch of radishes. Now, some of the students are asked to eat a couple of the cookies, but to leave the radishes alone. Another group of students is asked to eat several of the radishes, but to leave the cookies alone. Now, while these radish eaters are sitting there nibbling on this rabbit food, the researchers go out of the lab. They're trying to induce temptation. They're trying to see, will these radish eaters sneak a cookie? It's kind of sadistic when you think about it. But the radish eaters are strong. They resist the cookies. Not a single one of them sneaks one. And meanwhile, as you can imagine, the cookie eaters don't experience the same kind of temptation to binge on the radishes. So, the study appears to be over. And then both groups are asked to go on to a second step that doesn't appear to be related. It looks like a kind of logic puzzle, where they're asked to trace out a complicated geometric shape without raising their pencil above the paper. Unbeknownst to them, this task was designed to be impossible. Can't be done. The researchers simply wanted to see how long they would persist in a difficult task. Well, so the cookie eaters, they try, and they try, and they try, and they go on for an average of 19 minutes trying to solve this impossible puzzle. The radish eaters, they last on average 8 minutes. Why this huge gap? Well, the answer may surprise you. The radish eaters ran out of self-control. After they were reining themselves in, resisting those cookies, they didn't have enough energy left to rein themselves in to keep doing a frustrating task. And this is something that psychologists have proven again and again. Self-control, in the broad sense of the term, meaning any time we're really monitoring our own behavior carefully, is exhaustible. That helps to explain some common things we all experience, like when we're at work and it's been a really hard day, and we come home and we're more likely to snap at our partners. Now, here's why all of this matters for change situations. Because in almost every change situation, what we're doing is we're substituting new, unfamiliar behaviors for behaviors that are older and more comfortable. And that burns self-control. So think of your morning routine, for instance. You have a way, a system for showering and brushing your teeth, and you've been doing it for so long it's unconscious, it's effortless. What if you wanted to redesign the whole thing from top to bottom? You could do it, but it would take tremendous self-control. You would have to monitor yourself every second of the morning, and by the time you got to work, you'd be mentally exhausted. What looks like laziness is often exhaustion. Change simply wears people out. Even well-intentioned people will simply run out of self-control after a while.
Reactions?
Yeah.
I want to thank you all very much. Remember, you will always have a gorilla. You've got that elephant in the living room, and you will always have the fire drills, no matter what you do. Right?